A big hello and a very warm welcome to a special edition of Brand Equity. As you can see, we're not in the studio and we are coming to you straight from Goa Fest 2025. And today, my guest is a renowned author and also the former Chief Growth Officer and Strategist for the Publici Group. So, no better man to speak candidly and tell me what's going on today in the very confused advertising landscape. Thank you so much, Mr. Rishad Tabakowala. Truly a pleasure to have you right here on the show.
Thank you for taking time to speak with me.
So much to ask you about, but I want to start with the big news, which is really the big merger or the takeover, the Omnicom and IPG merger takeover. Explain that to me in terms of what's really happening there. How do you think these two companies merging together is going to impact the industry globally? And what's different from what happened in 2013 when there was an attempt by Maurice and John Wren, basically Publici and Omnicom, to do a similar kind of consolidation?
So I would basically say that the what I've read, obviously I'm not inside Omnicom or IPG. So what I've read and what I've analyzed seems to indicate that in many ways the same rationale for Publicis Omnicom in 2013 is being mentioned in 2025.
Sure.
So it's 12 years later, and the rationale is more media cloud, better ways to invest in data, and cost savings are the best I can see. Those are the three. The question, obviously, from an outside perspective, does that idea make sense in 2025?
Exactly.
When it may or may not have made its sense in 2013. One does not know.
Yeah, right.
So at the current time, I would say there are three levels of whether this will succeed or not succeed. The first one, and as important, is, and I think the most important, is whether they can continue to attract and retain talent. Because one of the key things that happens whenever you have two companies coming together,
Right.
some people figure out what will the impact be on my job. That's number one. The second is there tends to be at least 12 to 18 months of drama. So
Sure.
can you attract or retain talent, and can you attract and retain clients? Those are the two things that are always a big risk at that particular stage. The third is this actually a model, and again, I do not know, built for tomorrow or built for yesterday?
Wow, okay.
Okay. And if I were to today have money, I don't know if I would merge two companies. I would basically take a lot of money and start a new company. Okay. Because I believe the opportunity to, if I was one of these big companies, I would take the extra money that I was going to spend to buy the other one and actually invest in starting completely new things. Because I'm not sure that two old models married are going to give you something new.
Just a couple of follow-up questions to that. Obviously, both these companies, or holding companies, assume that because of them coming together, there will be cost efficiency, there will be scale, and they'll become the behemoth who challenges WPP and Publici and the others. Obviously, there will be a lot of rationalization, so people will have to be let go. But I'm saying, as somebody who's been on the inside and is an astute observer of the industry, what's going to happen? In any case, majority of the top companies or the top clients are rest with, let's say, WPP, Omnicom, and Publici, and a little bit with IPG, and then the rest. What's going to happen in terms of the shakeout? Will it mean that, let's say 80-90% will now kind of remain in that top three model? Or, is it going to be difficult for them to, because even the whole consolidation of these two mammoth companies, getting them together and getting them to be one engine is going to be very hard. Given both their independent scales.
So what has basically happened, and this is a statistic I overheard, that in the 6 months to February or March of 2025, almost all the new business pitches of the bigger companies in America were basically being won almost completely just by Omnicom or Publicis.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Okay. Which is kind of interesting, because I was a little bit going to WPP, etc. But then the two companies that were doing particularly well were Publicis and Omnicom, and to a great extent, if you sort of look at it, if you then add IPG to Omnicom, will it actually do something better,
Yeah.
or will it slow things down? Right. My basic belief is it's likely to slow things down versus making things necessarily better. Because I think what will eventually happen is most marketers are going to do a couple of things. They're going to ask a company, what are your differentiating advantages? Okay. And right now, I know the differentiating advantages of the company that I used to work at, and they've done a very good job, and they seem to be winning more, and they've become the largest in revenue and largest in market cap.
Sure.
Right? And those differentiating advantages have to basically do with things that have taken a long, long time to do. It's taken 10 years, $10 billion, and lots of drama to basically buy lots of companies, find a way to put them together, find a way to align. Let's say that the Publicis group was slow and stupid,
Yeah.
and other people can do it faster.
Right.
It'll take 5 years. In a world where the world is going to change dramatically in 5 years, you're trying to solve for an old model in 5 years. I really don't know what the ecosystem will look like in 5 years. What I do believe is that the big companies, whatever they're called, will still exist. My basic belief is I think WPP will be private or broken up. Okay.
Wow.
Absolutely, without a doubt, it'll be private or broken up. So if you think about it, there'll be actually two big holding companies. If it's called holding, they don't call themselves holding, they have different names, platform, AI companies.
Right.
But traditionally, they're two holding companies. And then there's going to be an ecosystem of different other companies. And in my book, I talk about that the future model of companies are going to be whales and plankton. Okay. So in every industry, there'll be some whales. So Omnicom may be a whale. Publicis might be a whale. And there may be a lot of plankton and the occasional squid and shark. And what that means is clients will basically have multitudes of agencies. They'll have some bigger agencies to help them with their data, AI, and media strategies. And then they'll have a lot of other people that they plug and play into. Because in many, many cases, scale becomes a disadvantage. I'm not exactly convinced that in the future, outside of 2 or 3 places, scale will be an advantage. So it's a long way of basically saying that from the outside, I sense that the Publicis Omnicom merger
The IPG on
Omnicom IPG merger is trying to solve for a problem that is 12 years old, but no longer seems to be the problem. Okay,
Right.
But again, I'm today a one-person author. I'm not sitting in a C-suite. So that's, from an outside perspective, it makes very little sense, especially because I think the future is going to be who can attract and retain world-class talent. And this is not good for talent because talent feels very insecure when two companies come together.
I want to deep dive a little bit of what you said about WPP. We know that it's hemorrhaging, and we've been following that. But what do you foresee? WPP, this once upon a time behemoth, which controlled, dominant part of the global market. What's its fate, according to you?
So WPP's fate is, as I said, it'll either be taken over by private equity, or it will be broken up into 2 or 3 parts, which will be sold to different people. So what do I mean by that? So think about if 4 things could go wrong, okay, through a combination of luck or bad management, all those 4 happened. The first thing, obviously, is their founder decided that,
Their founder, as Martin.
as Martin Sorrell, decided to basically start calling them names. And I've always basically said that, if you shit on your own nest, you're not a good egg. So my basic belief is you form this company and now you're not there and you're saying it sucks, which is highly questionable. And he then launched S4, which, as far as I can tell, was based on no strategy but total vengeance. And I said that, and people laughed at me because initially it did well for about a year. See what it is today. S4 market cap is 10 cents on the dollar to what it was at its height. Okay, so vengeance is not a strategy. So that was number one. But part of it was he was making fun of his own company.
Yes.
Okay. Second, his successor then did the strategic blunder of basically merging brands that should never have been merged and giving the wrong name to the right brands. So he destroyed JWT as a brand, Y&R as a brand, and now he's trying to basically, I think, save another brand by putting it under Ogilvy. Gray, under Ogilvy. And the reality of it is anybody who understands the business like I do understands the importance of different cultures, and that if I have joined a creative agency, I do not want to report to somebody who runs a data agency. If I've joined a media company, I'm not going to report to someone who's a creative agency. You put those things together, you get a mess, okay? And that was the second thing that they did, which was an absolute mess. The third thing that they basically did is they got the media part of it wrong for a long while, okay? And now they're trying to get it right, but in that particular process, they've now created WPP Media. So they're going to have these front names, but everything is going to be WPP Media,
right?
With Wavemaker or Media Essence, etc. So which is they're repeating the previous mistake again. So if you actually look at where the place stands, I still don't know a reason. There's not a defining reason for what they're going to do for clients. And if you look at it, I think WPP is being broken up so that they can have the media company being sold, etc. And if you think about it, IPG was selling its most valuable components after they failed. So if you actually look at me and you ask me what's the most valuable parts of IPG, I would have said McCann, which still exists, okay, and RGA, which doesn't, okay, and then to a certain extent it might have been also huge. So they actually took their very interesting brands, drove them to the ground, and then sold them for cents on the dollar. The same thing is basically happening with WPP. And so one of the big things that tends to happen is, this is what people don't realize, is when Martin left and Mark Reed took over, the value of Publicis and the value of WPP was about the same in the market, about $17 billion around then. So it's now 6 years. I haven't checked the most recent numbers, but WPP had gone from 17 billion to 8 billion. And Publicis had gone from 17 to 28. Okay? So Publicis market cap is greater than Omnicom and WPP combined.
Sure.
And my basic belief is because it was a completely different story and was no longer a story about merging and putting things together and things like that. And so I think to a great extent, it's a failure of imagination. And we're in the imagination business, and it's a failure of imagination.
Ironic.
So, which is quite remarkable. But I would basically say that, the market has recently said that Omnicom and Publicis do well. If you look at both the results, not that the other companies don't have talent and don't from time to time do well, but they've just not been very well run. And I really don't believe that there's anything in the long term for WPP.
Taking a cue from what you said, just to look at the Publicis growth story, right? And it's been phenomenal. What have they done differently? Why did they suddenly, from I would say a distant third, become, it was always WPP, Omnicom, and then Publicis.
So I think it was basically, first of all, a lot of credit has to be given to the current management.
Arthur Sidon.
Yeah, Sadoun and Dave Pensky and Nigel Vaz and Carla Serrano and all their CEOs, etc. And what they've basically done has been pretty amazing. But I would basically say that if you go back, it's a 2000 and these changes started in 2006. A lot of it, what you see in the last 5 years, the changes began in 2006.
That's when Maurice was still on.
Yeah, so it was when Maurice, and then later it was Maurice and the people who ran the company then, of which I was a senior person.
Right, of course.
At that time, we all sort of understood that the world was going to basically be more digital. So we basically invested very deeply in digital. At that time, buying companies like Digitas and Razorfish. The reason originally for the Publicis Omnicom merger is they had a lot of creative assets,
Sure.
and we had a lot of digital
Digital
assets.
assets, yeah.
Okay, so and we had equally strong media assets, but that was the thing. But then after that, there are three big reasons I believe that they have done very well. One is, and then we kept going. So after the merger did not happen, we purchased companies like Sapient and Epsilon.
Yes.
So we went into business transformation and more into data. So one is very smart acquisitions at the right time, which was forward thinking, going deeply into digital before most people went into digital, going deeper into data before most people went into data, market transformation, and spending a lot of money and it actually wasn't showing up. People thought we were crazy. Okay. But the real breakthrough came a little later, because once you had all these assets and you figured this whole thing out, were three key things. One was ability to actually get the companies to work together.
Yeah.
So there was a different compensation model called Power of One. The brands were still important, but incentives were run on a country level.
True.
So that became very much like we still have all these powerful brands in India,
Yeah.
but eventually Anupriya has to basically deliver the country,
Right.
right? And everybody knows that. So that becomes very important. And people get incented on how the country does, not just on how the brand does.
Fair enough. Yeah.
That was one. But that's very difficult, because to change that, when you change incentives and power structures, it's very hard. They did that very, very well. Second is they basically began to also recognize that in the future we'd be much more, there'd be two new types of media. One was influencer media. So they made big investments in influencer media and in retail media. So they made big investments in retail media. And the third is they actually understood that influencer media was as powerful as regular media.
If not more now.
And it all had to be powered by data.
Sure.
So David Pensky no longer is the head of Publicis Media. He's the head of something called Publicis Connected Media. And reporting up to him is not only media, but also Epsilon and also influential, which is basically the right. So they thought very broadly. So the ability to reimagine the business, great acquisitions, ways to reorganize so people could work together, and ways to reimagine the business with very good leadership is what's made that happen. But it's been a very long and crazy trip, as they say in the Grateful Dead, and that they managed to basically make it happen. And the best I can tell, they're doing intensely well, and occasionally I get a look to see, and I can tell you they are.
What do you make of the other ones, the Dentsus and the Havasas of the world?
So one of the key things in all the years I was there, I took every single competitor very seriously, and I cannot disparage any competitor. I can just basically, because many of the people there, I know the people, they're really good, right? So I can basically simply say disparagement isn't the thing. I think I'm just going to talk about the different strategies. As I said, a combination of their founder turning against them, very poor merging of companies, and then not a very good media leader. All of that led to a real problem at WPP.
Sure.
Okay. I think Dentsu historically has basically been a company where it eventually is too Japanese for the world. Okay, it's the best way to tell about it. And I saw this because Dentsu owned 20% of BCom3, which was what Leo Burnett was part of. And they're an amazing group of people, but they basically see the world through Japanese eyes. And that's fantastic. It's a great country, but you can't see the world through Japanese eyes.
Sure.
Okay. So that's the issue there. They've got some amazing assets like Merkle and others, but that's sort of one.
Right.
And then that basically leaves, smaller companies like Havas and all, which did not actually see a vision that Maurice saw, that the future was going to be so driven by people like the United States and India and China. And so he made a lot of investments in the United States. And to this date, I think most people don't realize, I haven't asked him, but I'm quite sure that the CEO of Publicis today, Arthur Sadoun, spends more time in New York and Chicago than he
Right.
does in Paris.
Oh, okay.
Okay, even though
Oh,
he
wow.
lives in Paris.
Sure.
Okay, so that ability to actually think, and it's, by the way, it's a very French cultural company, but it's not. It's a global company with French roots. It's not a French company, right? And so some of
And
these.
you're saying that's where the difference lies with Dentsu, which is a
Yeah, so
Japanese company.
Dentsu never got over its Japanese
Japanese
control.
roots, yeah.
Okay, so this company is a French company. Make no mistake. I mean, of French roots and French influenced and heritage, but the wings of the company are not necessarily in France. They're all over the world.
Right. Having said that, a few years ago, especially in Cannes, right, and everywhere, the conversation, the rise of the consultants, the Accentures, Deloitte, they're going to take over the creative industry, and advertising, will be cannibalized, and all of that happened. But what happened to it? Do you see any momentum there
No.
as an observer?
So it's basically just in the press. So for instance, the closest it's got, there's a deck in 2013. So the strategy deck, the Publicis strategy deck, was put together by a lot of people, but it was presented by Maurice and me and the CFO in 2013.
Right.
That's what's the same strategy that's working now. Okay, but that deck is when we basically actually showed ourselves in a box. Okay, with all these, Porter's forces. There was the consultants, there was the Googles, there was the Accentures, there was everything else. I think the long-term threat to the agency business is the platforms. It's not necessarily the consulting companies, and it's not Accenture.
You're talking about the Amazons and the
Amazon, Meta, Google.
Walmart,
Yeah,
Connect, YouTube.
yeah, all of those. Okay, that's the real competition, and eventually, I'm no longer there. I believe they have continued to build Publicis, keeping that in mind. Co-opetition, right? Which is, we can't do without them. And by the way, those companies make in a month more than the market cap of most of these companies. So they could put us out of our misery buying us in a second, but they
Sure.
won't ever do that. Our business model makes no sense.
Sure.
Okay. But what tends to basically happen is the long-term goal of the person who's most honest about what they want to do is Mark Zuckerberg. Okay, and he's been very successful. Like him or don't like him, he's been very successful. So Mark Zuckerberg's vision is this: a client comes to him with a credit card, and it's called the Meta ATM. Puts the credit card in, but instead of the money coming out, it takes the client's money. Okay, and coming out are sales. Okay, so tell me how much you want to sell and how much you're willing to pay, and I will deliver the sales. And if you think about it, what does Meta have?
Right.
Meta has the world's big, along with Google, the world's biggest audience that they can find, right?
Right.
They have all the data, they have all the algorithms. Now with modern AI, they can do all the creative. So their whole basic belief is, tell us what you want, here's how much it's going to cost, here comes the number. There's no consulting company that can do that. Accenture can't do that. Nobody else can do that, right? And so to a great extent, the big unlock really is, while Meta can do that, but so can Google, and so can Amazon, and so can TikTok. And interestingly, but they always are optimizing for Amazon and for TikTok and for Google.
Walled gardens.
And so what tends to happen is, these are continents, and our clients need to live across the world,
Sure.
right? Which is one of the reasons why the most powerful part, and one of the big things that also, by the way, that Publicis saw and allowed. So the Publicis board, there were only 5 people at the very senior levels, and the person who I think was the second most powerful person in the group at that time was my immediate boss. I also worked with Maurice, and then I worked directly with Maurice, and he ran all the media companies. Okay, and so what has basically happened, the differentiating advantages of these big companies is actually the media companies, because the media companies are the interface with these platforms.
Right.
The media companies is where the data and the numbers run.
Right.
Right. And that the ability to reinvent the company, recognizing that creativity is important, but it has to be media led versus creative led. Not that it's both bad, it's not one is the second, but
There's no money in media.
well, there's less money in creative, but the thing with media is media gives you all the signals. And see, I grew up inside Leo Burnett, then helped start all the media companies, then helped start the digital companies. So I've seen all the ecosystem. To me, it became very clear that where the customer meets the brand is through media.
Sure.
Okay, but media is very broad now. It's cultural. You're a media company. I'm a media company, etc.
Well, on that note, I would love to thank you profusely
much.
for your candid speak. Thank you for giving me and my audience. And of course, I'm hoping that the holding company heads are hearing you very closely and take heed to what you've said.
Thank you.